Hello, everyone, and welcome to Storytelling on the Plains. Today, you're just getting me. Connor couldn't make it today, so we're going to continue our series on theaters out here in the Panhandle, and hopefully you enjoy this story. We're going to talk today about all the other theaters that were around in Scottsbluff County, and then we'll continue on next week with around the Panhandle and then some drive-ins. And we're going to skip Gearing and Minutair. They're going to be their own episodes just because there was too much to put into one episode. Otherwise, we'd be looking at 3 hours for just Scottsbluff County. So far we've talked about the big places for entertainment in Scottsbluff, mainly because their buildings are still here. 2 of them, the Nile and the Midwest, are still used for entertainment, and the Opera House is being used for other business purposes today. And last week I ran into one of the co-owners of the Nile, and they are still, fingers crossed, hoping for the best. Things seem to be going a little bit smoothly, I think, and they're still working toward keeping the Nile open, probably not as a first-run theater, but something similar to how the Midwest runs. And, we'll have a little blurb and a little update when we hear anything, but so far we haven't heard any news, and that's how things go when you start up new stuff. It takes a while, sometimes months, to get things done and sorted, and I wish them all the best. But today on Storytelling on the Plains, we're going to talk about other places in Scottsbluff County where people were able to see a show over the last century and 20 years, so century and a quarter. So here's what I found out about them. In the early 20th century, the citizens of Scottsbluff were spoiled for choice in entertainment venues. In 1912, the Crystal Theater opened, while the Star Theater opened in 1914. And again, going back to that article I did about a decade ago with Lillis Grasmick, probably a little more than a decade now, she was the former curator for the North Platte Valley Museum in Gearing, and she told me that the Star Theater was the first building designed for the moving picture business. Now, there were other theaters here in town that had opened before the Star Theater did, but this was the first purpose-built one for movie theaters. Like if you go to the Midwest, they have a big stage. They can still do silent movies. They have a little orchestra down below. They still use their stage for live acts. But the Star Theater was the first one made just for movies. And then a year later in 1915, the Queen Theater opened, and its first movie was Birth of a Nation. If you've never heard of the movie before, don't go in it completely blind. It is a very well-known racist movie, but it's also known for some of its technological advances. And before we get into this, I found some other evidence that the Queen opened on October 19th, 1916. And again, I love this site, Cinema Treasures. It's been such a treasure for me because they are meticulously cataloging movie houses all over the United States. And the vast majority of the data that I found from them, and they've been scouring stuff all over the place. I know Legacy of the Plains Museum in Gearing has some of this information, but it's not collated together. Like, you can't just say, give me some info on the Star Theater or the Queen Theater. Someone there has to know where it was at, including you if you're the one looking for the information, and then they have to go someplace and find it in the archives. It's not all archived together, and then even if they find info, okay, it's in the Star Herald newspaper archives, or it might be in the Gearing newspaper archives, or it might be over here in this other section in the archives. Like, it's not everything isn't bundled together. And these folks at Cinema Treasures have been doing this for God knows how long, and it's all right there on their website. And then you could go down to Legacy and say, hey, give me the Gearing Courier from this date, I need this article. Give me the Star Herald from this date, I need this article. Or, I know that this postcard or this picture or whatever is in the archives, can you go get it? But they just don't have anything collated for that purpose at this point in time. And that's okay. They still have the information. They can still find it. It's just, for me, it's a little easier to go to Cinema Treasures. I don't know if they take donations or support or anything. I believe it's all just a volunteer project and a labor of love. And I truly appreciate all the work they did that helped me find more info on the places I knew that was there and the places that I didn't even know existed. And then not only do they say, hey, this is where this place was, they got photographs of it and they got snapshots of newspapers. So it makes your research a lot easier when someone else has come along. And I've noticed on the Western Nebraska movie theaters that it's like the same 3 or 4 players that have been volunteering their time doing this. So I really, if they ever listen to this, I really appreciate all the work that they have done. And so I was told that 1915, the Queen Theater played Birth of a Nation, and the Cinema Treasures website has other information that it opened on October 19th, 1916. I'm not going to, get too upset about that because Birth of a Nation came out in 1915, so maybe that's where the local folks here got mixed up with, was, oh, that film came out in 1915, so it must have been shown here, and they know it was shown here, but maybe it was, it's very easy to screw those date kind of things up. So I'm not too worried about that at this point in time. Anyway, so back to Birth of a Nation. You can go read about it on Wikipedia, and I'm going to read a little bit about this movie, about why it was important, and I still cringe when I hear the title of the movie because it's not good. So The Birth of a Nation is a 1915 American silent epic drama film directed by D.W. Griffith and starring Lillian Gish. The screenplay is adapted from Thomas Dixon Jr.'s 1905 novel and play, The Klansman, a historical romance of the Ku Klux Klan. Griffith co-wrote the screenplay with Frank E. Woods and produced the film with Harry Atkin. The Birth of a Nation is a landmark film of history, lauded for its technical virtuosity. It was the first non-serial American 12-reel film ever made. Its plot, part fiction and part history, chronicles the assassination of Abraham Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth and the relationship of two families in the Civil War and Reconstruction eras over the course of several years. The pro-Union Northern Stonemans and the pro-Confederacy Southern Camerons. It was originally shown in 2 parts, separated by an intermission, and it was the first American-made film to have a musical score for an orchestra. It helped to pioneer close-ups and fade-outs, and it includes a carefully staged battle sequence with hundreds of extras made to look like thousands. It came with a 13-page souvenir program. It was the first motion picture to be screened inside the White House, where it was watched by President Woodrow Wilson. The film was controversial even before its release, and it has remained so since. It has been called the most controversial film ever made in the United States, as well as the most reprehensibly racist film in Hollywood history. The film has been denounced for its racist depictions of African Americans. The film portrays its black characters, many of whom are played by white actors in blackface, as unintelligent and sexually aggressive toward white women. The Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist hate group, is portrayed as a heroic force that protects white women and maintains white supremacy. So I don't know how many folks listening to this have ever seen those tropes about black characters in movies. They always portray them as, I mean, it's being kind here, saying unintelligent. Excuse me. They portray them as the most stupidest people on the planet, because how else could you be a black person and be a slave? If you weren't so stupid, you wouldn't have been a slave. And it's just a way of dehumanizing a person. And so that trope continued into the 20th century. I remember when I read To Kill a Mockingbird, and we got to the part where the I forget the gentleman's name now. He was on the stand for allegedly raping the white lady. And everything that was going on in the courtroom, and the questions that Atticus Finch was asking, hey, you're sympathetic toward the black man because he didn't do this. He did not do this. The woman set him up, and it was well known that the woman and her husband in the book were, you knew they were setting him up because they didn't like him. But when this gentleman said on the stand that he felt sorry for her, I knew as a 14-year-old kid, the moment he said he felt sorry for a white woman, he was done. Didn't matter that he was innocent. And I knew this in the 1980s when I read this book, and that book was written in the 40s or 50s. And then you also have, for whatever reason, I've never understood, black people were always listed as sexually aggressive and willing to go out and attack women willy-nilly just because that's who they were. So that's another way to dehumanize people. And both were on display in this movie. And for some people, it wasn't a big deal. And as much as I would like to say that Western Nebraska was more enlightened in 1915, 1916, this was a popular movie. It was controversial. So yes, of course they're going to bring it in because people are going to go and watch it. You still have people like this in town. I have had people, when I talk about the fact that I have Lakota friends, they're like, oh, how much do they drink? And I'm like, really? Really? That's the first thing you think of when you think of Native Americans, because that trope is so ingrained in our society. Or I get when people talk to me about black people, Native Americans, and any brown person, I hear the phrase, you know what those people are like. And I just respond with, no, what are they like? What are they like? Explain it to me. I want you to voice your racism. I want you to say it out loud and prove to me that you're the racist that you just subtly said. And a lot of people won't. They stutter and stammer and change the subject, and it really ticks me off, because if you're a racist, be a racist. But the fact that you're trying to hide that you're a racist, you know that you're wrong. You know it's wrong to say that, and it's wrong to treat people like that. So it makes me a little bit sad when I know that Birth of a Nation was chosen as the first movie for the theater. I try to remember the times and where it was at, and the reason the movie has such a lasting legacy is because of what I just read, all of the firsts that it did for film and the things that it changed that hadn't been done before. And unfortunately, it is part of our history, and I don't like to shy away from the bad parts of our history. If you hide the bad parts of your history, you can't really grow because you don't know where you came from. If you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going to go. And you don't know how to change. Or why do we do this thing? We do this thing because we learned from doing this other thing in the past that it was wrong and we shouldn't do this thing. So let's not do it again. So I understand the movie's significance. It's just I choose not to watch the film. I don't want anything to do with it. And if I were to watch it, I believe it's it's out of copyright, and I think you could just go find it online and watch it. I don't like to sit through movies that are horrifically racist like that. At least with To Kill a Mockingbird, there are a lot of lessons to learn in that book as well as the movie. And I didn't like the movie To Kill a Mockingbird because they left out too much. I don't particularly care for movies that are based on books because too much needs to be cut out, and a lot of times there's stuff that can't be transferred to film. And so I tend to stay away from those as well. And that's just my own personal choice. You can watch them. It doesn't matter. To Kill a Mockingbird, if you never read the book, the movie is still a good movie. It's just I read the book, so I feel like there's something missing. It's the same with the movie Congo. I was very disappointed in that film because they cut so much of the book out that a lot of the movie didn't make sense. And it didn't do well in the box office. So anyway, back to the Wikipedia description of Birth of a Nation. In spite of its divisiveness, The Birth of a Nation was a massive commercial success across the nation, grossing far more than any previous motion picture, and it profoundly influenced both the film industry and American culture. Adjusted for inflation, the film remains one of the highest-grossing films ever made. It has been acknowledged as an inspiration for the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan, so great, which took place only a few months after its release. In 1992, the Library of Congress deemed the film culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant and selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. For me, it kind of sucks that it had so many innovations and that it was so impactful because it's a horror film. And that's, I think it's also an example of the things that we wrestle with today. You know, everybody admits slavery was wrong, but no one wants to really look at how wrong and how horrific it really was. I was actually talking yesterday to my nephew about a trip I made to Tanzania, and I was on the island of Zanzibar and went to this place where they held slaves before they took them up. So they were in the basement of this building, and they took them up into the slave market. It was literally, maybe 25 feet from you climbed up the top of the stairs. The exit from the building was right there, and then 25 feet later you're in the slave market. In this place, you could maybe fit 30 to 35 people comfortably, and there was a big channel running through this little room, and it is a little room, and there's one tiny light that if I put my face into that window, you can't get another face in the window because my whole head just took up that space. But there was this deep channel that was probably about 3, maybe 3.5 feet tall, because I remember I had to climb up a little bit. I am only 5'4", and so I had to climb up a little bit to get into this ledge area where the people could sit. Now the problem was all the people were chained together. They're shoving a couple hundred people into this spot made for 35 people max. So there's people standing in this channel area. Well, this channel area is also where people relieved themselves. And when the tide came in, the water from the ocean came into this part of the building and would wash out in the morning. You have far too many people shoved in here. People died. They drowned. It it didn't fill up to the spot where you were sitting, maybe a little bit and you'd get your butt wet, but you're shoving, 5 times the amount of people in that area that should have been in there. I remember going in there and there were 6 of us. And I sat down on that area where you could sit. I was there maybe 45 seconds. I was like, all right, I'm done. I want to leave. I understand the horrificness of slavery, but to sit there and experience a little tiny part, I was done. And I could get up and leave. These people couldn't. And so if you are a black person in the United States, you can't change your color. You have to experience this crap over and over and over and over. And now it's 1961 and the highest grossing movie ever, and still one of the highest grossing movies ever, depicts you as all of these horrible things. That's why I hate the movie. I get it. It was innovative. I don't want to see it. If you want to see it and experience it, that's your choice. But for me, it's just going to be a hard no. I just don't like to surround myself by that kind of stuff. I understand because I also grew up in the late 1970s and early 1980s, growing up. Even in New York, where everybody thinks everybody's super duper liberal, I still came across people like that. I walked down the street with my black friends and I saw this kind of shit happening. So I just choose not to watch a movie about it. I understand the significance historically for filmmaking, but I don't need to see the film to appreciate that part. Anyway, that's why it sucks for me. So, according to Lillis, when I had talked to her, she said this building wasn't, the building for the movie theater wasn't entirely completed when the picture came to town. So the manager supplied plank benches for the missing seats and the show went on. The official opening of The Queen was on November 13th, 1916, with a live stage play called The Story of Marion Gray. So the Queen was like a lot of businesses. I'm sure you've been to a new store in town, it opens up, and you're there like a couple of weeks before their official opening. And I think that's what happened here, was they had the opportunity to get a copy of Birth of a Nation, show it to folks, but their official opening wasn't until November 13th. It doesn't really matter. We know it was there. It doesn't matter when the official opening was. We just know the Queen was there, and it wasn't completely done on its official opening, and folks had to sit on, makeshift plank benches, which, if you know folks out here in western Nebraska, nobody gives a crap about that kind of thing. I would imagine most places don't. They'd just be like, hey, we came to see the film. Oh, the seats aren't done? Let's just go get some wood and make a couple seats and watch the film. Nobody cares. It's just one of the endearing things of many places that I've lived, that's just what people would do. Oh, you're not quite done yet, but you got the movie? Well, we'll just figure out our own seats. Don't worry about it. A few months after this, on February 12th, 1917, the Queen was renamed the Orpheum after Henry Dubuque took it over. And this is something that I have found throughout the entire time I've been researching theaters here, is this person owned it, and then someone else took it over, and then a consortium of museums took it over, and then this other group took it over. To me, it just shows that someone wasn't able to do it anymore, but it's a good thing for the community, so let's find someone else who could take it over. Or maybe in the case of when the consortiums took over, and the large movie groups took over, they might have made the owner an offer they couldn't refuse. They might not have been thinking of selling up, but they get an offer and they're like, all right, and it's just how things go. The same thing still happens today. I have lived here for 18 years now, 18 and a half. And And I believe we're on our second ownership of the movie theater at the mall. At least the second one since I've been living here. And, whatever. They're keeping the theater open. People are going to see the movies. That's what most people care about. They want to have a place to go see movies, and it's over there at the mall, and they don't care too much about who owns it. Most people I know in town can't even tell you the name of the company that owns the movie theater. So there you go. When the 1918 flu pandemic hit, many theaters struggled. People stopped going to church, the theater, and anywhere else there might be a bunch of people. Most people were banned from large gatherings with good reason. And if you would like to know more about one compassionate person, you can look back to our episode on the Great Miss Bish, and who was Hubert Bishop and what he did for folks during the pandemic. But it unlike Scottsbluff, now back home, back in New York, my family told me of all the things that were closed, where they couldn't go, what they couldn't do. Everything in New York was closed like things were closed here in Scottsbluff in 1918. But for the COVID pandemic, people here just went nuts, and they just refused to close stuff. I didn't go out because I don't want COVID, and I still haven't gotten it. But I didn't want to get COVID, especially before there was a vaccine. I had read the science on it, and I was like, I don't want this. But a lot of places here had restricted number of peoples that could go in the store. The Safeway in town had the first, I think it was first hour, it might have been the first 2 hours they were open, were only for senior citizens, because when you get old, your immune system has a harder time fighting things off. So let's have those folks go get their groceries without being overly compromised, and hopefully make them a little bit safer. So things were relatively safe. And there were some restrictions, but nothing like in 1918 when everything was just completely shut down. And New York State, they had so many bodies. I know in the city, they had the freezers that they had to rent because there were so many people. And I remember my family members telling me what it was like there, and it was so different than here. But when the 1918 flu pandemic hit, how's a theater supposed to make money when nobody can come to it? And people were banned from going out in town. And in some sense, it was a different time as well, because 1918, folks were still more self-sufficient. I would hazard a guess that most people had a backyard garden, and they could grow their crops and stuff. Or, they know Jerry down the street who's, gonna kill his cow that he kills every year, and they can get some beef from Jerry, and then they only need to go see Jerry. Whereas now, if you want to go get your beef, you got to go to the supermarket. You're going to encounter a whole bunch of people. So it was probably a little bit easier back in 1918 to shut everything down. The town was also a lot smaller, and people knew everybody a lot better than you do today. Even though Scottsbluff still only has around 15,000 people, I don't know everybody in town. So I think to some degree things were a little easier to say, yeah, let's just close things till this gets sorted because we don't want to die. And there was no flu vaccine at the time, and thousands of people were dying, well, hundreds of thousands. So it was horrible. So in an ad in the Star-Herald on November 15, 1918, a footnote read, "A season of excellent attraction is now being completed for the winter and will begin as soon as the ban now on the city because of the influenza epidemic is raised." Again, it's that language from 100 years ago, the way they wrote. It's not the way I would write, so I tend to stumble on these words, even though I've read the sentence at least a dozen times to try and prepare. They just wrote slightly different. But basically, the now Orpheum Theater was basically saying, hey, we got stuff lined up, and as soon as the ban is lifted, y'all can come and watch movies at our movie house again. So folks were anxious to be able to gather again, but they were also cautious. You have to remember, there was no internet, no cell phones, no entertainment or information at your fingertips. The rumor mill was probably a bit more rampant than it is today, although I'm not on Facebook anymore. And when I left, it was the rumor mill was horrific, and I couldn't stand it. But back then as well, people tended more to respect the rules about gathering. And I imagine it was still like it was during COVID. It was probably difficult for many people to be alone for so long. When the U.S. had a lot of closings due to COVID, it didn't really bother me. I mostly stay at home and read and write. And at the time, I was working at the youth shelter on the overnight shift. So I literally only saw people the last hour of my shift. And that was for Friday morning. I worked 3 10-hour shifts. And Friday morning, I had to get the kids up and get them off to school. And then the next shift came in and relieved me. And then Saturday and Sunday, they normally did not get up until the shift that relieved me came. Now, some kids did wake up and they would come and talk to me, and we kept our distance and stuff. But for the most part, when COVID started, I didn't see anybody anyway because I'm working the night shift. I'm also a homebody. And even today, I read at home. I do all my writing at home. I don't go out a lot. I'm an introvert. I'm naturally shy. And I have had these conversations with people because they're like, but you write and you share stories. And go and look and do some research. A lot of the really, really good writers and even journalists are natural introverts. But we happen to have a talent to write, and we love sharing stories, so you kind of got to figure out a way to work with that. I just have the added thing of being shy as well. Shy and introvert are absolutely two different things. Even doing this podcast, we don't do it at Connor's house. He comes to my house to do it. If I go outside, I'm usually out in nature hiking. I go out very early in the morning to go grocery shopping so I can go out and come back before anybody really sees me, so I can just get my stuff and go home. It's just my nature. And I happen to marry someone who's like that too. We spend an inordinate amount of time alone and alone together. It's just who we are. But I didn't realize there are a lot of extroverts that struggled during COVID. And during COVID, I found this new appreciation for the folks in 1918 during the flu pandemic that, you know, they couldn't go out. And it took a lot to get to town for some people anyway. There were more farms. And, you know, what if you only go to town once a week to hang out with your friends? And now you can't do that. Now, and there were probably a lot of people that were even more isolated because you're at home, you don't have a telephone, there aren't any TVs, there aren't any cell phones. You've got books, but what if you live alone? And what if there are a couple of groups of farmers in town here that get together every morning for coffee. And it's neat. They just get together, hang out. They've known each other 50, 60 years, some of them 70 years, because there are some 90-year-olds that come out and still do volunteer work, hang out, do their coffee thing every day. But now you can't do that. And now you're in 1918. So you can't even go out to the theater by yourself. You can't go out for a meal to the Eagle Cafe by yourself. I think the Eagle Cafe was there in 1918. You have to stay home. and let's say you are very extroverted, that's going to wreak havoc on your mental health. So even after they opened the theaters again, there were still people that were cautious about going back. They were anxious because they're like, yeah, I can go out again. But then they're also cautious because they're like, I don't want to get the flu, and I don't want to give somebody the flu if I happen to have it. So the COVID gave me a better appreciation for how these folks were living, and I know they read, but how many books did they have in their house, and did they have to read those books over and over and over? I don't know, but it gives you a little better appreciation to think about what they went through. And also the business owners, because the business owners can't have their shops open, can't have their theaters open, can't have their restaurants open, and they probably still have to pay rent on those spaces, and they've got no money coming in. That's got to be a huge stress. I know it was a bit of a stress for us last summer. The place where my husband works at the hospital, the ward was closed for about a month, and he wasn't worried, but I stressed out the entire time. What if we can't go buy groceries? What if we can't pay the electric bill? And it worked out in the end, and it was only a month. I can't imagine being closed for months on end, or a year or more, because if you open your place of business, people will gather, and then people will die. I wouldn't open my shop because I wouldn't want that responsibility on my head, but you're also worried I'm going to lose my shop. So and it was a different time. Maybe the landlords gave some leeway on the rent. Who knows? I haven't researched that. But 9 months later, on Tuesday, August 12th, 1919, we see things had changed. The Orpheum Theater ran an ad in the Star-Herald for the American Welterweight Championship Wrestling match on August 20th between Joe Stake and Young Gotch. It was billed as a treat the Valley has been longing for. You can read that two ways. They're longing for being able to go out in public again, and maybe they were longing for seeing the welterweight championship wrestling match. Maybe it's something folks were into, and they were like, man, are you guys going to get that here? We need to see that. But I'm sure it probably played more into not being able to be out in public for a long time. So in case you want to know, the Star-Herald ran a headline in the Friday, August 22nd paper that read, Joe Stake winner over Young Gotch in one of the best and fastest wrestling matches ever held here. Secures first fall in 45 minutes with wrist lock, second in 28 minutes with toe hold. There was a fairly detailed story about the match as well. So it went off without a glitch, and hopefully no one got the flu because of it. The Orpheum also gave away a free bag of candy and nuts to the children on Christmas and told their parents, come early, we'll take care of the kiddies. So there you go, drop your kids off and y'all can go have some fun. And your kids can get all sugared up on candy. The Star Theater also ran an advertisement for their Christmas Day shows, which I found amusing. They said they did not have candy or nuts for children, but they would double the money value in the pictures. I didn't find any other stories about who won, but between the two theaters, but I suspect both places did. They'd been closed for a long time. Now they're open, and you're either going to get candy for your kids at the movie for free, or you're going to double your money value. So I'm assuming getting to see two movies for the price of one. If it had been me, I would have went to the Star Theater to avoid all the children who likely stuffed themselves with too much candy at the Orpheum. Either way, it probably depends on what was being shown, which movie I wanted to see better. Maybe I might have had the money to go see both. It just depends. But I think everybody kind of won all around. You'd been stuck inside forever. Now you can go outside, you can mingle with people, you can talk with people, and you can support your local businesses. And I just think all around, everybody probably won out in the end. Now, we've talked about William H. Ostenberg Jr. before, because he had a hand in the Midwest and the Egyptian before that. But he purchased the Orpheum on January 19th, 1919. And this is also when the Midwest Amusement and Realty Company was formed. It purchased the Star Theater in 1923. So the two of them were rival theaters, but this dude ended up buying both of them. So for him, he's winning no matter which one you go see. The company also acquired Danceland, a large auditorium erected in Scottsbluff at 1620 First Avenue in 1926. The building had an ornate facade constructed of glazed green tiles with molded floral wreath and swags. Charleston dance marathons and other dancing events were held there until the dancing craze passed. So Lillis had told me that Lenore Everett said she participated in marathons at Danceland, in which you went until you fell down and passed out on the floor. If you go into the building today, you can still see where the dance floor was. Eventually, Danceland was converted into the Oto Theater, which is the Elks Club today. So if you know where the Elks Club is on First Avenue, that used to be the Danceland, and then it was the Oto Theater. And if you don't know where it's at, you can just go to 1620 First Avenue. That big green wreath is still outside. It's part of the front facade of the building, and it's probably always going to be there. So it's neat that building is still used today, and it's still used for social gatherings, just social gatherings of a different type. I've been in it twice, once for a news article and once both for a news article. I forget what the first one was. It was something to do with the Elks Club. And then the second time there was a cornhole tournament held on the floor where I believe the dance floor used to be. So the Oto Theater was a third-tier movie house, and we talked in our last episode about how the company mortgaged its property on Broadway to build the Egyptian in 1927, which is now the Midwest. And Ostenberg equipped the Orpheum with a crappy hand-me-down sound system from the Egyptian in 1929. And it makes sense because at the time the Egyptian was the theater in Scottsbluff, and he also owned the Orpheum, and it needs a new sound system. Well, the Egyptian's getting the really nice one. So, the old one is old and kind of crappy, but it still works, and it's better than the one we got going on in the Orpheum. So we'll just shift it over. I've done things like that before, and recently I wanted a new microwave. I didn't need a new one. I wanted a new one. The one I had is like 15 years old, and I knew someone who needed one, and they liked my microwave, so I was like, here, take it. I didn't charge them anything for it. And so I have a new microwave, and they have a new microwave, even though it's an old microwave, and it works. And that's kind of what happened here. Everybody was happy all around because everybody got upgrades. So on November 5th, 1929, Why Leave Home was shown with it at the Egyptian, with the new movie equipment. When the Egyptian burned, an ad ran in the Star Herald telling folks to go to the nearby Bluffs Theater at 1621 Broadway. And we talked about that a little bit when we were covering the Midwest in our last episode. But at the time when I had first come across, I was like, well, what's the Bluffs Theater? Where's the Bluffs Theater? Because I've come across the Otto and the Orpheum and the Crystal and the Star and Egyptian and what's the Bluffs Theater? Well, in 1936, the Orpheum was gutted and remodeled into a rustic-style theater building by architect Lynn McReynolds, complete with pine logs and knotty wood. When it reopened on July 31st, 1936, or possibly August 1st, because I've read accounts of both and they're only a day away, so whatever. It's a day away. I'm not going to quibble over it. Just to let you know, I found both. So when it reopened, it got a new name, Bluffs Theater. It was a second-tier theater. The movies on opening night on August 1st were Educating Father with the Jones Family and Parole with Henry Hunter. In 1937, it was reported to have 578 seats. So my thought is it opened on July 31st. They're all open for business. There's probably folks in the office getting ready for the movie they're going to show on August 1st, the next day. That's my best guess and why there's the discrepancy in a day. In the long run, it doesn't matter. The opening night of the movies was August 1st. When the Egyptian burned on August 5th, 1945, the Bluffs became a first-run theater. As a result, the Bluffs bookings were sent down to the Otto. So the Otto was a third-run theater. Bluffs was second run, Egyptian was first run. When the Egyptian burned to the ground, they didn't want to lose first run movies in town. So everything just kind of shifted on down the line. And it remained that way until the Egyptian was rebuilt as the Midwest, and then everything shifted back to Midwest was first run, and Bluffs was second run, and Otto was third run. But again, because the same dude owned the place, it was very easy to shift all that stuff along. I also think that people probably, were just like, let's figure out what we can do anyway. If they had been owned separately, I would imagine the owners would figure out a way to keep first-run movies in town until things got sorted. It just kind of seems to be a thing that people do in this town. Well, what can I do to help? It's one of the things I've noticed about living here is most people, if you talk about a problem and you're looking for help, most people will say, what can I do to help? And maybe they're just giving you some money. Maybe they're loaning their place, loaning their car, whatever. I have run across more people that ask, what can I do to help, than people that just say, oh, I'm sorry, that's so sad for you, and then do nothing. So even if Ostenburg didn't own all of those theaters, I think the same thing probably would have happened. Again, that's my speculation, but I try to look for the good in people, and I've seen more good than not. It's just unfortunate that the not good is what gets amplified, and we should do more amplifying of the good. So the Bluffs was gutted and redone in 1956, and on December 2nd of that year, it opened as the new Bluffs Theater. According to a February 3rd, 1981 story in the Star-Herald, it closed its doors on January 27th, 1981. The Business Teachers Corner was there when I moved into town in 2007, but the building's been empty for several years now. But if you look on the outside of it, it's got that stereotypical curve for the awning that a lot of older theaters had. So it's very easy to spot it there on the almost on the corner on Broadway. I'm not exactly sure where Teachers Corner moved. I think they're still open. They moved before the pandemic or during the pandemic, and I'm not exactly sure where they moved to because they catered more to elementary teachers, and my husband had taught high school, so we had only been in there once or twice, but I know a lot of folks went there to get stuff for their classrooms. Lilith also told me several other things, and she was really the one that got me on learning about the great Miss Bish, and I just wanted to add this little bit here in case you haven't heard about Miss Bish or listened to the episode. There was a grand opening gala when the Lincoln Hotel opened, and we've done an episode on the Lincoln Hotel, so go listen to that as well. Bishop was among the performers that night. Others had family members who were musicians and regularly played at the Opera House. So again, all the music and the live shows, it's everywhere in town. Even the Lincoln Hotel had their ballroom, and folks performed there. On Sundays, many people made the rounds of the theaters in the area, and if they timed it right, they could see 3 movies in one day. And I kind of chuckle about that because it reminded me of when I was in school. I knew this kid, Doug. I was a junior and he was a freshman. And Doug and I were only ever friends, but we both loved movies. So we would get together on Saturday and we would look in the newspaper because I'm old, no cell phones, no internet. The movie theaters would run an ad for the weekend. Here's our weekend showings. So we would call each other on the telephone on Saturday, and we would open the newspaper to the page where the ads were for our movie theater, which was Cinema 6. And it was Cinema 6 because there were 6 theaters there. And we would plot out the movies. So we would go to the 11 or 12 showing, whatever the first one was, and then we would plan, okay, this one gets over at this time. Can we sneak into the next one? And we did that all day till about midnight. We would spend about 12 hours every Sunday at the theater. And it was every Sunday when marching band wasn't in season. We were both in marching band. And if we went away for competitions, obviously we couldn't go to the movies. But if we were home, and competitions were just from September to December. So the rest of the year, if it's Sunday, we're probably at the theater. And so I thought it was neat that it was noted that everybody went to the theaters here, and if they did it right, they could see three movies in one day. Of course, they all had to pay for them because the theaters are all separate from each other. We're just stupid high school kids. We paid for the first movie, and everybody knew we were doing it because they saw us from time to time go out to the bathroom. And nobody said anything because we didn't cause any trouble. Could you do it today? I don't know. I don't know if theaters would be that nice, but we didn't cause trouble. We didn't cause a ruckus. We didn't aggravate people. We just went, we watched the movie, we enjoyed the movie, and then we went home. And we usually went home separately. I don't know how safe that is today, but we lived in opposite directions. Sometimes Doug's mom came and picked him up, and she would occasionally give me a ride home, but usually I just walked home because I lived like a half mile from there. Or my grandma lived a half a mile from there. I had moved at that point in time. So I'd just go stay at my grandma's house. And, I just had to let my mom know I got home safely, and that was that. And my mom knew what I was doing because we had everything planned out. We're going to go see this movie, and then we're going to see this one, and then we're going to see this one, then we're going to see this one, and then I'm going to come home. Well, what time do you expect to be home? Probably about 12:15, 12:20. All right, call me by 12:30. If I didn't call by 12:30, then I might be in trouble. And there were some times where I did walk home, and my house was about 2 miles from the movie theater. So if I was going to walk home, I would tell my mom that I was going to walk home. And my mom worked the night shift for most of my life. And the times that she was home, she just knew what time to expect me. And then if I wasn't home by that time, she would get in the car and come look for me. And if I was more than a block or two from home, there'd be trouble. But typically there wasn't. But she worked many, many night shifts. and I would just give her a ring at work to let her know, hey, I got home. I'm home. I'm okay. So I just found it neat that more than 100 years earlier, people are doing the same thing. It's just they had to pay for all their movies, and I got a lot of mine for free. So there was also the Village Twin, which is now Bacharach's Bar and Grill. If you go into Bacharach's, you can still picture how it used to be. It's now the restaurant and the liquor store out front, but where the liquor store is out front is where I believe was the ticket counters and concessions and stuff. But if you go into Bacharach's to get a meal, they kind of left things a lot like it was, and they've got giant screen TVs on the one side, because it was a 2-theater place, and you can see how it was 2 theaters, and you can see where the giant screen was for the movie, because they have a giant television screen there now, and they show football games and different sports on there. So it's neat that they've kept that part of the building's history there. Commonwealth Theaters, which thought the Midwest was dead weight because it required too much maintenance, jettisoned it not long after the Village Twin opened, and it was around the same time that it became First International Theater. And again, these massive groups start buying up the local theaters. I saw that happen in my hometown. It was just like, I think it was a group of 3 or 4 folks that had the money to put together Cinema 6, and then eventually some corporation bought them out, and it just, I mean, it happens. No matter where you're at, you might have a little theater, and then some corporation buys you out, or you expand, and now you're the corporation. And it's just the way things go. There's a restaurant in town. I'm not going to name the place because I don't really care for the place, but other people do, and they've expanded it. So there's also Sam and Louie's in town. There's a Sam and Louie's down in Sydney, and I believe they're owned by the same people. It happens. But the one restaurant that's in town, there's 3 of them out here in the Panhandle owned by the same people. I don't really like the people, so I don't patronize their business, but they could easily continue to expand, and then they would become the corporation instead of just the owners of 3 places. They could easily become the owners of every one of these places in western Nebraska. They just choose not to. And that's what happened with the theaters here. Commonwealth Theaters became First International Theater, and then shortly after that, they jettisoned the Midwest because they thought it was too much to upkeep. I think the Commonwealth might have kept it, but once they had sold up, First International just was like, yeah, no. And they ended up donating the Midwest to the Oregon Trail Community Foundation in November 1998, and it became this massive volunteer organization, and they don't do first-run films. I think I only know of once in the entire time that I've lived out here that there was a first-run movie, and they caught it at the tail end of it being a first run, so it was pretty close to being second run. But that's okay because the theater is still here. It runs on donations and volunteers, and they do phenomenal work in the community. So the Commonwealth built Cinema 6 at Monument Mall. Cinema 6 at Monument Mall. And that opened on September 13th, 1996. That theater is now the Golden Ticket Real Lux 6 Theater today in January 2026. I think it just became a case of they've got this new fancy schmancy theater that has 6 theaters. They can, bring in they think 6 times the cash, I guess. But it's more expensive, and they can make more profit off of it as opposed to the Midwest. So it's not surprising that they were like, yeah, we're just going to let the Midwest go. And a group got together and organized to keep it up and keep it maintained, and it's still here. That happened in 98, and we're in 2026, and the theater's still here, and it's still an important part of the Scottsbluff community, just like the Nile Theater up in Mitchell is an important part of the community, and they're trying to find a way to save it as well. So I think that is all of the theaters that were here in Scottsbluff. There were many others in the county, and I had originally intended to do just Scottsbluff County, and it turned out that it was just too much, and the episode would just be way too long. So I decided to just do an episode just on the ones in Scottsbluff, and then we've got a few more, and hopefully I will hit all of the ones that I know of in the Panhandle over the next few weeks as we finish up this very long series on theaters in the Panhandle. Now, I knew that when I eventually get to agate fossil beds and the Scottsbluff National Monument, that it's going to be a very long multi-part series. I honestly didn't think this when I started on the theaters. I thought 3 parts, maybe 4. And then it quickly became a case of, do I just want to say, oh, this theater was here and it's not anymore, and that's it? No, because I have a little bit of information. So I tried to group together as best as I can. So I think that's all of them in Scottsbluff, maybe. Many of the stories of a lot of these other entertainment venues are only known by those who chose to share before they passed on. And then I stumble upon them from time to time. We have blurbs here and there. Like, I've come across folks who remember a theater that showed Spanish films in town, and that the ballroom at the Oto was a match car derby track for a while. But most of those memories are lost to history because people, they don't think to talk about it. You know, yeah, okay, when I was a kid, I went and I did, match car derbies at, the Oto Theater. And they may tell a family member or two, but in general, nobody talks about it because they don't think of it as important. So then by the time it passes down to me, my dad told me and his granddad told him that he was the one that did it. Well, granddad's been dead for 50 years. So, and okay, I'll try and go look through the newspaper articles. I can't find anything. And it might just be a case that, everybody knew the match car derbies. I can tell you that they had the little match car derby here. I think it's Christ the King in Gearing, the Catholic church there. They had the derby in there one year, and I had to go cover it for the paper. And when I covered it for the paper, I found out that they've been doing it for decades, and no one ever writes about it. So I made a point of putting that information in the newspaper so that if anybody ever came across my newspaper article, I had as much historical information as I could in it, because to me it's important to know that these things happened. When I wrote the book about the history of the Scottsbluff National Monument, when I was going through the archives, I found they had boxcar derbies down the road. And when I mentioned it to some people had no idea, and then other people were like, oh yeah, I remember that when I was a kid. And so to them, it was even a memory that had to be a little bit joggled because they hadn't thought about it. It wasn't important to them, and that's okay that it's not important to them. But if the monument had not documented it, I wouldn't have even known to go and look for research elsewhere about this thing happened at the monument. And that's just kind of the way things go with humans. I know there are things that were important to my mom that were not important to me. And she would mention something. Do you remember when you did this thing? No, no. And then she would say a few more things, and then you kind of joggle my memory a little bit. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember that. It was way more important to her because she remembered it in more detail than I did. It was just something I did, and I moved on with life. It's just the way the human brain works. So for me, I want to find as much info as I can, and I think I did for the theaters in Scottsbluff, so that if someone ever comes across in the future, I've got a little transcript. I've got my notes where my sources were. I do that for every single episode, and I've got the podcast. So if anyone ever wants to do more research and find out more, like those folks at Cinema Treasures, they did a lot of work for me, and then I added my work in on top of it. And so whoever comes next has the benefit of that group plus me that have done research, so it's easier for the next guy that comes along that tries to tell the story. But that's about it for today. There are four more episodes coming. We got three. We got the theaters in Alliance, Sydney, and Kimball. Then theaters in the Panhandle, because during my research I found out there was a theater out in Crawford that I didn't know about. We've got theaters in Minnetonka and Gearing still to get to, and then our final episode will be on the drive-ins around the Panhandle, which I found really interesting. I knew of a few of them, and there were way more than I ever knew were out here. And it makes sense. We live out here on the Great Plains. It's the perfect land for drive-ins. And most of them are not around anymore. But if you keep coming back to listen to me ramble on, I'll tell you more about theaters, and then we'll move on to something else afterwards. But we need to finish up our theaters first. And I do hope that you enjoyed this one, even though it was just me by myself today. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and just come back next time, and I'll keep on a-talking. For now, I'm Irene, and this is Storytelling on the Plains.